Okay, you will be expected to recall these two types of price strategies firms use when colluding. Both are quite self-explanatory, but we have price agreement and we have price leadership. And I have subtly touched on these two in a previous video, so just wanted to define them for you. So let's try and match both of these to the types of collusion. So price agreement, firstly, to define it, is when firms communicate and agree to set prices. Now, what type of collusion does that sound like? Fairly simple. It is overt collusion. And if you could talk about a price strategy such as price agreement, talk about the type of collusion it is, and then give an example that is absolutely top level. So British Airways and Virgin Airlines were fined 120 million for fixing the price of fuel on flights. Then secondly, price leadership, which occurs all the time in the real world and is quite interesting. So this is when firms do not communicate but follow prices set by the price leader. And of course, since these firms are not communicating, it is tacit collusion. Now this occurs in every industry, in every sector. But a great example has to be Tesco, which they are the price leader for tomatoes since 2001. To add to that example, a significant proportion of Sainsbury's changes in tomato prices can be explained simply by the changes in price of Tesco's tomatoes, which shows a clear relationship between the leaders and the followers. So as a whole, in supermarkets, Tesco and Asda are usually seen as the price leaders, with the followers being Sainsbury's, Morrison's, Co-op, Marks and Spencer's. Moving on, contrary to what we have learned about collusion, firms working together to achieve joint higher profits isn't always negative. And this is where we draw the line between cooperation and collusion. And the way I used to remember this, drawing the line between legal and illegal. Cooperation is a legal and open collaboration to achieve a mutually beneficial outcome, whereas collusion is secretive and illegal agreements which exploit consumers for higher collective profits. So even in cooperation, the mutually beneficial outcome could in fact be higher profits. However, the main thing, it will not use shady tactics to exploit consumers and is legal and open. A great example of cooperation recently is the Toyota and BMW lithium air battery collaboration. But to be honest, I tried to do some research on this collaboration and there's been no updates since 2013, so could work as an evaluation point, the effectiveness of collaboration between firms and whether collaboration between rival firms is actually sustainable. Moving on, going back to the classical economic assumption, which of course states all firms are profit maximizers. Now, if all firms are profit maximizers, it would theoretically make sense for all firms to collude, as when firms collude, it increases joint profits in the long run. But this begs the question, why do most firms turn to price competition instead of colluding? Number 1, incentive to cheat the collusive agreement. This occurs as the collusive agreement is set up by both firms sticking to a certain price, which in turn will increase their joint profits in the long run. But the problem with this is the time frame, that collusive agreements are set up for increased joint profits in the long run. This means one of the firms can cheat the agreement, lower its prices, therefore in the short run steal all the quantity demanded, therefore increase its own revenue and increase its profits. And as we know, every firm has a profit incentive, so they could be incentivized to cheat the collusive agreement for those short run profits. Secondly, collusion, and specifically overt collusion, comes with its legal risks, as of course is illegal, therefore can be fined by the CMA. Thirdly, new objectives. Firms may decide to, for example, sales maximize to boost market share, thus meaning they no longer need to stick to the collusive agreement. Lastly, due to it being hard for firms to come to an agreement. As we need to remember the nature of these firms which are coming into this collusive agreement, they are fierce competitors in the exact same market. This means there's large tension between the firms and it becomes extremely difficult to reach any sort of agreement. Now, we know the reasons why firms move to price competition, but what are the 3 different types of price competition? There would be, firstly, price wars, then we have predatory pricing, then lastly, limit pricing. Let's start with defining price wars. This is when firms undercut each other with lower prices to steal other firms' consumers. It's almost a very desperate attempt to steal other firms' consumers, and if you ask your parents, this is a very well known example. In 1996, Tesco declared victory in the baked beans price wars, where they were selling at just 3p per tin. Price wars are about as simple economic theory as it comes, but let's try to assess the winners and the losers in this situation. Let's start with the winners. Who is it positively affecting? So, by firms engaging in price wars and desperately undercutting each other, lowering prices, this is of course going to positively affect consumers. Why? Because prices keep going down, therefore increases consumer surplus. So for example, if the original price of these baked beans was 20p and you were happy to buy it at 20p, but now they've gone down all the way down to 3p, your consumer surplus has basically increased 17p. And consumer surplus of course being the difference between what consumers are willing to pay and what they actually pay. Now, moving on to the losers, so the negatives of price wars. Of course, it's going to negatively affect firms. It's going to definitely impact their supernormal profit. Maybe they have no supernormal profit left. But let's try to develop that a bit more. So if firms do not have supernormal profit, how will that affect consumers? The lack of supernormal profit could actually negatively affect consumers due to a lack of dynamic efficiency, which in the future could lead to a lack of consumer choice, a lack of quality, for example. I would definitely encourage, try to do this with loads of different parts of the specification. So try always think about the winners and the losers, the positives and negatives of any sort of economic theory you learn. Back onto price wars, like we mentioned, why do firms try to avoid these price wars? And that's simply, just like we stated, they will destroy firms' profits and can even lead to losses for firms. That's all there is for price wars. Now let's move on to predatory pricing. This is where a firm aggressively cuts prices to force competitors out of the market. This is actually fairly common in the real world, with Starbucks being a massive culprit of this. So Starbucks intentionally operating at a loss to force local coffee shops out of the market. Predatory pricing is actually a lot more detailed than price wars. Let's get into it. Initially, let's start with making sure you understand which firms will practice predatory pricing. This will be large incumbent firms with massive financial backing, e.g. Starbucks, just massive corporate firms. And you'll come to understand why that is. We're going to split this up into two time frames, so the short run and the long run. In the short run, what the large incumbent firm, e.g. Starbucks, will do to force out the smaller local coffee shops is to set price lower than AVC, so price lower than average variable costs. And you may know this as the short run shutdown point. What does it actually mean that average variable costs are greater than price? This means that the firm is making a loss on every single unit it sells. The more it sells, the greater the losses are. As of course, the way we define average variable costs is the cost per unit. Now, like I said, this is completely fine for the large, cash-rich incumbent firms. So with AVC being greater than price, these large incumbent firms are making massive losses. But this is fine for the large cash-rich incumbent firms, as they have enough money, they have enough financial backing to weather the storm. They can survive the losses. Whereas if you think about your small local firms, for example your local coffee shops, they do not have the financial backing, they do not have the financial means to make massive losses. This means the small local firms' prices are much higher than the stupidly low prices set by the incumbent firms, meaning that these small local coffee shops are now extremely uncompetitive due to their high prices. This means consumers substitute away from the expensive local coffee shops to the relatively cheaper incumbent firm, meaning that this kills the local firms, quantity demanded, and will force them to shut down. Now, this is the exact outcome these large incumbent firms were looking for. So now, in the long run, these large incumbent firms have forced out all their competition. So now, theoretically, they're almost a pure monopoly, they have 100% market share, therefore have price setting power, so increase prices massively and exploit consumers with increased prices and just overall have complete domination over the market. And this is exactly why predatory pricing is referred to by the CMA as an anti-competitive practice, therefore is illegal, as it allows these incumbent firms to develop monopoly power, taking over the market and exploit consumers with high prices. Moving on to the last type of pricing strategy, this would be limit pricing. Now, predatory pricing and limit pricing are confused all the time by students. The way I used to remember it is predatory pricing is to force firms which are already in the market out the market, whereas limit pricing is to stop new firms entering the market. And that ties very nicely into the definition. So limit pricing is when incumbent firms set prices low enough to limit new firms entering the market. This is another practice which is fairly common in the real world, and we see it with British Airways. So they were offering unsustainably low fares to deter new low-cost airlines gaining significant market share. So for example, Ryanair. Now, just like with predatory pricing, knowing the method of how firms limit price can really help you develop a great chain of analysis, so we're going to go through that. This starts with a large incumbent firm which is already in the market, and this large firm will be experiencing economies of scale. The large firm, just like any firm, will be exploiting these economies of scale to try lower its costs. For example, technical economies of scale, investing in specialist capital, therefore making workers more productive, therefore lowering costs. So, by firms exploiting these economies of scale, it allows them to lower their costs. And with lower costs, it allows them to justify setting a low price. As quite simply, if you can imagine, if your costs are really low, you can set a price just above that and still make a profit. And now, these lowered prices will limit new firms from entering the market. Why does it stop new firms from entering the market? Let's put ourselves in the shoes of a small new firm wanting to enter the market. This firm will have zero economies of scale compared to the large firm's massive economies of scale. And with no economies of scale, this means a new firm will have high costs relative to the incumbent firm. And if you have high relative costs, what does that mean for your price? This means you also have to charge a high price. Now, if you saw a firm you've never heard of and it's selling a good 2 times more expensive than a reputable seller such as Amazon, would you take the risk to buy from the new firm, or would you just buy from the reputable firm? Therefore, with high prices, this leads to no quantity demanded, therefore no profits. And you can link this back to the classical economic assumption: firms are profit maximizers, and therefore without any possibility of profits in the market, there is no incentive for new firms to join the market. Therefore, if a large incumbent firm is limit pricing, new firms stay out the market.